All right, welcome on, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here on a holiday Sunday evening. And before we actually get started with the show, let's begin with the return of Karl Anthony Towns to Minnesota. Your facial thoughts as I first move you
To
to
the
your
correct
proper
side.
box. Yeah, okay. I can't do that. I can only do that face going like left to right. I can't switch around. Okay. What's yours?
Let's see. Mo Wagner being out for the year.
The possibility that had we actually gone in reverse alphabetical order as we were scheduled to, we would have started with a discussion of Wizards Hornets on this show. We just lost every viewer except for Kevin Pelton.
It was actually a fun
Although
game.
actually he wouldn't watch either because he would have watched the game himself. He wouldn't need to listen to our
I will say it was
Wizards.
a more enjoyable game than I had feared. We'll
I
talk about it.
yeah. No, well this has been a fun time to catch up on some of these East teams, and we'll talk about that right about now. Let's do a podcast. Welcome on to a 15 in what will be much more than 60 here on the East. We did mailbags the last couple of weeks. We've been really focused in on the NBA Cup. So it was a great chance to watch some games of some of these East teams that have not necessarily been top of mind the last couple of weeks. And Danny, let us begin with a team that has been more top of mind, I would say, the New York Knickerbockers.
Let's do it. The Knicks are 18-10 on the season, a strong 4-1 since the last 15 and 60. Their +9 clean the glass net rating is 5th in the NBA. That's propelled by being number 2 in offense, but they're also 12th in defense. And ESPN's BPI projects them to win 47 games, which would be the 3 seed in the East. And one quick piece of business for the Knicks. Landry Shamet, for those who remember, he was expected to make the team. He got injured and then got cut. And then now the Knicks have signed Shamet and waived Matt Ryan to open up the roster spot. So I guess this bodes well for Shamet being available to return.
Yeah, and they, I think, could use him. It looked like he was in preseason. He was trending to actually be in their rotation, and they have not been as thin as we thought. In part because they basically have not suffered a single injury all year,
which is incredible.
But I want to talk to him about Karl Anthony Towns and his return and why he was able to be so successful. But I first want to begin with what you said at the outset. And this team has had some losses that have been somewhat embarrassing, and they have struggled some against switching defenses, to be sure. But I mean, that's a nasty net rating. That is a championship level net rating right now, 9.0. They're 18-10, so they've been a little bit unlucky compared to that 9.0 net rating. Also noteworthy that 9.0 is only 5th in the league here now, over 2 months in to the season. But yeah, that offense is looking really, really good. And they've just had a number of these wins where, again, the Wolves at home, I mean, yeah, they went through it a little bit on offense these last couple of games. And we'll talk about why the Knicks matched up so well with them, ironically enough, having with the Wolves having given them the piece that they most struggled to match up with themselves. But like, does this, I think there's sort of a feeling of like, oh, the Knicks are not championship contenders. I think even James Edwards wrote a piece to that point. But like, statistically, why aren't they? Or is it just go beyond the statistics?
You do have two teams in the East that have played really strongly so far. I mean, the Celtics won the championship last year, have a more kind of talented roster. They haven't really been full. They've been full strength for a little bit, but not that much. But, and if there's a Knicks Cavs series, I could absolutely see either one of those teams doing it. I think the Knicks have the chance of being better on offense than the Cavs are on defense, and then how those things go both ways. So if we're talking about making it to the Eastern Conference Finals and potentially making it through that, I think the Knicks absolutely have a pathway to doing so.
Yeah, I mean, the Cavs have been awfully impressive, and the Cavs did really hurt the Knicks early in the season. I think the Knicks getting blown out early in the season by the Cavs and the Celtics It was maybe part of why the brand hasn't been great. And there's been this story of Mikal Bridges and his struggles. He was awesome on Thursday night against the Wolves, but that's gotten a lot of attention also. And then there was also Karl-Anthony Towns and just how awful he was defending the rim earlier in the season, which has gotten at least back to, an NBA level, not allowing 90% at the rim anymore. He's gotten more comfortable in Tom Thibodeau's system. I think he also has just played better and played harder. So, I mean, I still look at this team and I think, man, like they just have too many weaknesses. Brunson, Karl-Anthony Towns, you get those two guys in a pick and roll, you're going to be able to mess them up pretty badly. And do they really get up enough threes? Are Brunson and Towns, as good as they are and as unbelievable as Karl-Anthony Towns has been as a force, as we'll talk about more in a second, he certainly was in that Wolves game, playing center again. I think even I had forgotten like how awesome that could be as someone who had championed that for a while. But it does there's also the possibility of an injury. We're just assuming that they're full strength right now. Like maybe there's just something about this offense and the way they've struggled against switches where you just don't, Karl-Anthony Towns not being like a real serious defensive player, that you ultimately feel like they're going to come up short. Just who their best player is. Like Jalen Brunson is, we had him in like our top 10, an MVP. I think we both had him 5th, right? So
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, you think that's maybe a good enough player to win, but, he's a small guard. There's only one small guard who's led a team in NBA history to a championship, really, that wasn't a total ensemble cast, although this one kind of is. Yeah, I think just some of the hurtings that they've put on, like, pretty good teams has been eye-opening. Like, I think I really want to see how this next, and then let's see also if they can bolster things a little bit, too, at the deadline.
They are pretty limited in terms of flexibility because of all the other moves they made, but there absolutely are some things. And just to run through some of those significant wins, I mean, they crushed the Wolves in the game you're talking about, but then they also, in the last few weeks, they had a pretty comfortable, they had that dominant win in the Cup over the Magic. The Magic were shorthanded, but they still did that. And then they just have a number of big ones. They had that win over Denver a few weeks ago. And they've just been, not only have their wins generally been good, but their losses have generally been close. They haven't been to the greatest teams, but at least they've been fairly close.
So let's talk about that game. And one of the things that's kind of stuck out to me, and I said this at the beginning, and particularly as the Knicks weren't that good against the Celtics on opening night, of, well, teams that are really serious, they can just put their power forward on Karl-Anthony Towns. They can switch anything with Towns and Brunson, and they're going to make OG Anunoby and Bridges beat them from the corners or against closeouts, putting your center down there, or maybe you even have enough versatility to switch things 1 through 5 if you have to. Teams have, either there are not that many teams who can do it, or teams have more respect for Bridges and Anunoby, because I haven't seen that strategy used all that much against the Knicks this season. Even I think maybe Denver would have gone to it at the end of that game had it been close. Spoiler alert, it was not remotely close. That was like a 40-point blowout. And so then this will happen to me a lot of times as I'm going through preparing for these teams, because I was like, all right, I'll check out Towns' highlights here against the Wolves and see if there's anything that's really interesting about it that sticks out to me, because it was he came back, it was a big game. All right, I should at least watch that. And all of Towns was 5 of 5 from 3. He was 10 of 12 from the field at 30 points, 6 assists. I mean, it was just an incredibly efficient performance. But 4 of his 5 3-pointers took place being guarded by Rudy Gobert, where Gobert just kind of didn't quite get out far enough on him. And a lot of those were in semi-transition. There was another one where Jaden McDaniel was kind of on him. He didn't get far enough out either. So those are all 5 of his 3s. And then there's a few more where guys were kind of closing out late. But the one thing I didn't see in any of his buckets was him beating Julius Randle. So my assumption was, okay, they just, for whatever reason, they just didn't feel like Rudy Gobert could guard someone other than Karl-Anthony Towns, or they felt like Towns would just blast him in the post or something if they didn't put Gobert on Towns. So I looked at the NBA's matchup data. The findings were quite striking there, Danny. I'm guessing you're looking at it for the first time now. Are you
I am.
surprised?
That the person who defended Karl Anthony Towns the most was Julius Randle. Yeah, I mean that's pretty telling. But
Well, he didn't score a single point when Randle was defending him, and I watched all of his points.
Nate, it's bigger than that.
Yeah,
Karl Anthony Towns didn't attempt a shot when he was guarded by Julius Randle.
Yeah,
that is fascinating.
Well, and it just shows you what an incredibly efficient, opportunistic scorer he can be. And yeah, 5 of 5, even for him, is a ridiculous 3-point shooting performance. But they really weren't just like going to ISO him. I think when he was guarded by Randle, they just decided to go elsewhere. And when he had the quick opportunity to transition, I laud Towns too, because you would have thought coming back to Minnesota, his mindset would be, well, I'm going to go out here and dominate and show these guys they never should have traded me. He had a quote to John Krasinski before the game about how he never wanted to leave Minnesota. That's not the same as saying he is unhappy where he is now, but he certainly never thought about leaving Minnesota. He said now maybe about 3-4 months after he first signed that Supermax extension, I started to think about it. He can't say he was totally blindsided, but after having such a good year, and then also, frankly, like the way he sacrificed to come back early from that surgery for the playoffs a year ago. But for him to just come out and let the game come to him in that way, I thought is really impressive given how he was feeling emotionally, to be sure.
It is. And something else that stands out looking through this matchup data, which is on NBA.com, it's a fun thing to look at if you want to get into a game, is Naz Reid only guarded Karl Anthony Towns, former teammate, for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Towns only scored 3 points, but the Knicks scored 17 points off of that 2 minutes and 40 seconds. So that is another, like, sometimes you're creating those opportunities for other people. And, you know, that takes some willingness to pass and everything else. Towns had 2 assists in those minutes as well, but also, you know, ball pinging around and everything else like that. So that I found interesting as well.
Yeah, and we should clarify just a little bit more for people who are not as familiar with this data that it does have some limitations. They've done a better job refining the algorithm, so it represents when guys who's matching up with someone initially, but you still run into the problem of little guard blows by his man and then shoots a layup at the rim against the bigs who's coming over. Who does that count? Is that a possession? Is it a partial possession? Like, does it switch over to being the big's responsibility as he shoots the layup? Like, those sorts of things are just difficult to apportion credit for. But in the case of Towns, it really wasn't. I watched all of his buckets and just saw who was guarding him, and it did correctly apportion it in this case. So it's always important to take a look at it and see whether the matchup data is really correct as far as like who is responsible, right? Like if Karl Anthony Towns blows by someone and then finishes at the rim over a point guard, like that point guard, you know, shouldn't get a debit for that performance. Mm-hmm. So in any event, I was really impressed by Towns. And then the Knicks, like the Wolves don't have any shooting right now. They just play 2 total non-shooters at this point. Well, I don't know. I don't know what you would call McDaniels and Randle. Like those guys are like half shooters. Gobert's a non-shooter. Mike Conley is not playing like a shooter this year. So that plays right into the Knicks' hands where they can just pack the paint and they're not going to get spread out in spread pick and roll, and Towns is not going to just get killed. Anthony Edwards has been upset after some of these games saying that there's just nowhere to go. The paint was too packed, and that was a good strategy by New York.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll talk about Minnesota's woes at various points over the next few weeks. This game was one that like Conley really struggled in. There have been a few others like that it will merit attention, but we will save that for another time. But yeah, the Knicks, I mean, you and I used to always associate this with Jeff Teague from one year, but it's like the best times to be really good and like the other way, the worst times to be really bad are like the first 2 weeks of the season, the last 2 weeks of the season, because those are the things that stick with you. And I think that might be part of the Knicks' problem, was that they had this rough stretch relatively early. We're forming our opinions, and they've been better since then, and they've figured a lot of this stuff out.
Let's talk about this Boston-Chicago game now, Danny, and let's begin with the Chicago Bulls and their 13-16 record, 3-1 since we last checked in on them. Interestingly enough, they have a top 3 road record in the NBA. They have 9 road wins already, but they are a mere 4-10 at home. I don't put anything into that other than just bad luck or good luck, depending on what you think of it. But negative 2.9 net rating, above where I thought they might be, but that's still 21st. They are 14th on offense and 24th on defense. But BPI likes them for the 7th seed,
Woo.
which 40-42 and 64% chance of making the playoffs. I wonder, I want to dig into that. Maybe just that they've had a harder schedule so far would be the thought. So let's begin, though, by talking about this game against Boston. Then we can shift to the Celtics as we go on through here.
Yeah, and to clarify, the Bulls played the Celtics twice since the last 1560. This is the game that Chicago won. They won at TD Garden.
Oh,
117.
Okay, well, I'm looking at the wrong number then.
Yes. And
so this is the road game, not the home game.
Very but this is the one that fueled their road record success rather than and their home record futility. That was the way to do. But the reason, so I partially wanted to watch it because it was a game that the Bulls won and wanted to get a sense of that. You kind of, when you're lower on a team, you kind of want to see some of their better moments to see where you're wrong. And I was super happy I watched this game because I didn't know much else other than that when it happened. And the reason why I'm really happy I watched it was that this was a wonderful showcase game for Zach LaVine. For those of you who listen regularly, I have been very critical about some of the teams that might be giving up a lot for LaVine or even just taking on his contract. And this game, the win in the Garden, was a reminder of how dynamic an offensive player he can be. Boston, they pretty much had all their guys. Sam Hauser still dealing with back spasms, or was for this one at least. So he didn't play, but the rest of the rotation was pretty much intact. This was a game that Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford both played in. And Zach LaVine, he was pretty consistently beating the Celtics one-on-one. He was able to get downhill, and that was how things kind of started for him. But then Billy Donovan did a really nice job, I think it was in the early third, getting LaVine in situations where Kristaps Porzingis became the primary defender on him through a switch, or through one was kind of a sort of a version of a Spain action. And the reason why that worked really well was LaVine could use the threat of a drive, which he'd been doing so successfully in the game, to get Kristaps Porzingis to use his help instincts to take a step or a half step back, and he started drilling threes. And so LaVine's overall line on the night, 36 points, 11 and 19 from the field, 6-11 from three, also got to the line 9 times, only 1 turnover. And so I thought that as somebody who has been, lower on LaVine, he had this really bad year, and who's, he's been the best offensive player for the Bulls. And as you mentioned, they're top half of the league in offense. That a reminder
and moreover, by the way, to quickly piggyback on that, 115.7 offensive rating when LaVine is on the floor, and they are 9.1 points per 100 worse when he is off the floor. So he certainly has made a difference in boosting them, maybe not to an elite level, but he's clearly been their best offensive player. Now he pairs some with Nikola Vucevic as well, who's been really good this year, at least on the offensive end too. But so there is some collinearity there, as the nerds like to say.
Oh,
but
for sure.
Nonetheless, that is a pretty good number to indicate that he's not just, good stats, bad team.
And you saw that collinearity in effect because one of Billy Donovan, I brought up him getting Porzingis on LaVine, was that they were also using that same general thing to try to get Vucevic jumpers. He only took 3 3-pointers over the course of this game, but they were a lot that were kind of close, or he was getting a jump shot, or the threat of the jump shot was opening up something else. And so I think the main story here was LaVine and the way that he could help out. And I cracked up because I was watching the Celtics feed, and Scalabrini in particular was like, well, this is why they're trying to trade this guy, because he's actually helping them win games. And I was like, that is actually kind of true. That's why I've argued it at moments in time. And so I thought that LaVine doing that against, and I don't think this was the Celtics playing at the peak of their powers in terms of intensity or execution defensively, but they weren't that far off. LaVine was getting by Drew Holiday, getting by at times Derek White or Jaylen Brown, and then using that to get the jump shot and everything else. And so it was a real force for him. And I mean, Kobe White had some nice moments pushing the ball in transition. And then for Boston's point on this, kind of focusing on the big picture takeaways, yes, they lost the Bulls, but I didn't think of this as Boston, failing from a shot making perspective. Jason Tatum had this line about how every loss of theirs is big. I didn't think of this that way for them. I thought Chicago's offense was encouraging.
Well, they did fail from a shot making perspective. They were 14 of 56.
Oh, sure. But what I mean,
and this was actually, this tied the record that the Bulls were also involved in, where with 75 missed threes against the Hornets. So
correct. And
56 threes for Boston, 52 for Chicago.
But to clarify, what I mean on that is that Boston wasn't generating bad shots. They were just missing the shots they were generating.
Oh, so shot creation is what you meant.
Yes. Yeah. So their shot creation was fine. Their shot making was deficient. And so I'm not going to read too much into that. I thought that Tatum, at times, he looked good. And yes, I think that the Celtics could have pressed some of their advantages a little bit more. The Bulls, they have some pretty solid point of attack defense at some positions, but then they don't have much help behind that. I thought Boston could have been a little bit more aggressive, but also the Bulls don't force any turnovers, so Boston was getting a shot up. So I didn't see anything like, oh, this is a telling loss for the Celtics or anything like that, other than there were a couple of small things. And again, it's this kind of game. So because we'll focus more on the Bulls because they won in the success, and because we've talked a lot about the Celtics and will. So the other things that I warn a little bit. So Chicago has to run in order to be competitive against a team like Boston. I thought there were a few possessions where Boston's transition defense was a little bit lacking, where they didn't track a man, and so they gave up an easier basket than they could have. And then the other one, it didn't affect in most of the game, but there were a few big possessions late as Chicago kind of established and then held a lead, was we did get to see Boston's defensive rebounding rear its head, which happens every so often. And so Vucevic had a couple big ones. There was one where Kobe White was opportunistic. And so against a team that is a little bit more concerted there, I do think that Boston will have they will have some concessions. Now, those concessions are worth it when you consider the whole thing and who they play and how good they are. And I think they can play with more intensity. But it was a game that, even with how much better, Chicago shot, that Boston, with a couple extra of those plays, could have won.
So the Celtics, they are 22-6, 3-1, with this being the one loss that we're talking about right now because the sky's falling. They are third net rating, 11.4. Third on offense, 122.1. There are three offenses, Cavs, Knicks, Celtics, that are just way ahead of everyone else this year. And they are ninth on defense right now. They actually have now project to be the 2 seed behind those Cavaliers, but to still get to 60 wins. And I think that's going to be fascinating to see those two teams battle it out, see how much they both care. But they also, both these teams have such good systems. I want to talk more about that when we discuss Cavs Bucks later. But it does seem like Cavs and Celtics both are pretty capable of winning games when they have players out. Now, the interesting thing about this one is the Celtics had their full complement against Chicago, and they still ended up getting smoked, blowing the lead in the fourth quarter. But again, really rough shooting day for them.
Yeah, it was. Boston's best and most prolific offensive rebounder was Peyton Pritchard. He was just flying in there, getting spots, and he can do that because they don't have to sacrifice too much in the transition defense. I did talk about that a little bit. I didn't think Jaylen Brown was as dominant as he could have been. They mixed around the matchups a little bit, but remember that the Bulls are starting White, Levine, and Dosunmu together. And so Dosunmu is usually guarding the most dangerous of the smaller guys. And then Pat Williams, who actually had some huge threes in this game. He was 4 of 9, had 2 in the first quarter, and I think he had 2 in the fourth, which pretty much sealed it. So I thought the Bulls did a decent job executing, but I also thought Boston could have pushed their advantages a little bit more. The single best play from this game was actually a Talen Horton-Tucker behind the back pass to Julian Phillips in the paint. He's driving and throws a behind the back pass. You don't actually see that very often in what was pretty much a half-court possession. Was pretty sick. I thought that Talen Horton-Tucker, there was a little bit too much of him with the ball in his hands at some moments. I thought when Levine and Kobe White and Dosunmu actually had a big stretch in the fourth quarter, it looked a little bit better. I think that it's just getting the alchemy a little bit right for the Bulls, making sure that they have those guys, that they have at least one, ideally 2 of their best offensive players on the floor at one time. And that is a challenge when you start those 3 guys.
One last thing on Chicago. Lonzo Ball is back now. He missed a few weeks with that wrist issue. And it does seem like Billy Donovan, despite the minutes limit, is trying to get him out there as much as he can. Lonzo's definitely shooting a lot of threes. He's at 9.1 per 36, which I'm guessing is a career high. But he's only hitting 28% so far. He's a career 36%. And, he spent the first 3 years of his career with really weird form before Fred Vinson in New Orleans helped him, or maybe he helped himself. Who knows? But Lonzo still has by far the best net rating of any of these guys in the Bulls. Going against bench guys, to be clear, most of the way. But he's got like a +6 net rating, even though he's not shooting it very well. So he does stick out on this team, even in a diminished state athletically, of just someone who can do something as a two-way player. Like they really just don't have very many of those, despite the fact that they've been way better than expected this year, particularly on offense. Like as much as we might joke about the Bulls and their overall direction in the top 10 protected pick, like this team and Billy Donovan, I think, deserve some credit for how well they have played so far this season. And they absolutely could make the playoffs if they didn't have, shall we say, other incentives.
Agreed. And one other note on this one, Josh Giddey did not play. I believe he has returned from that ankle issue by this point, but he had not. This game occurred on Thursday, I believe. And one other thing,
he's questionable for Monday. That's what he's hoping
so maybe he'll be back. Speaking of two-way players, Derek White, one time it was Patrick Williams trying to create one-on-one against him. Another one, I believe, was Ayo Dosunmu tried to go at him one-on-one in transition. Those did not go very well for those Bulls. And Derek White is just a monster in those circumstances. He didn't have the greatest offensive game, 3 of 12 from 3 in the loss, but he is still an absolute force defensively.
Adam says he'll happily take the under on the 7th seed for the Bulls. Yes, I agree for the reasons we talked about. And then Ross says Brown is horrible this season. Yeah, 54% true shooting is not great. Now, the Celtics are still a +12 per 100 possessions when he's on the floor. It's not necessarily hurting them that much, and he hasn't shot it well from the outside. I'm not sure what it is that, like, his jumper just looks a little bit off. He always will kind of struggle with how high to jump on his jumper and where exactly to release the ball. Sometimes he shoots on the way down. Sometimes he does that and makes it anyway. Maybe he also is struggling with them he's probably the guy who's affected the most by them not having 5-out spacing because the way he likes to get to the rim. But yeah, he just hasn't been that good on the offensive end this year. I don't know what to make of it. He's had moments where he hasn't shot it that well in his career, but then you also have moments where the Warriors decided they were going to just not guard him last year and he just banged a bunch of shots. And now it seems like Drew Holiday is the guy that teams are focusing on with that. Danny says the Celtics looks like a team playing at like half to 3/4 speed and they're still winning a lot. And yeah, I agree. And particularly when they're resting guys too.
I agree. And this wasn't the most crisp they've ever been. And even with the missed threes, they still had a chance to win late. Like it was like a 5-point game with about 4 or 5 minutes to go. So like they could have won it. They just didn't. I will give you the choice of which of the games you've watched you want to focus on next.
Well, we did get one other comment here asking about the Wolves making the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, which we're not talking about that much here, and that it was for future salary cap implication. We did a whole show on that. Actually, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it, talking about all the reasons why they made that trade. Are perhaps incorrect reasons. We shall see on why we like that trade for the Wolves. So, yeah, let's roll with the Indiana Pacers here, a team that I had wanted to lock back in on, and they didn't disappoint in this one. They smoked the Kings. We're going to see them again tomorrow night in San Francisco, but they are 4-0 and have gotten back to one game under 500. They were 10-15. Looked like they were really struggling. They are a -1.8 net rating, 18th in the league, 12th on offense and 21st on defense. And I still think that they will make the playoffs, or at least, be firmly in the play-in mix. 37% chance to make the playoffs, but I think some of the teams above them will fall off. So, just overall, Danny, what took place in this game today in Sacramento?
Well, so it was worth noting. Domantas Sabonis did play. Of course, the history between these two franchises was the biggest thing is the Sabonis Halliburton trade. Sabonis did play. He had been, I think, was questionable with an issue, but it was
ankle sprain for him.
Ankle sprain was, to me, was a combination of the offensive barrage from the Pacers. I mean, you score 122 points in a regulation NBA game. That still moves the needle for me. But also, I don't want to talk too much about Sacramento. I watched a fair portion of their loss to the Lakers over the weekend just because I happened to be home at the right time. And their offense is having some challenges.
Yeah, it is. That'll be a future topic, I'm sure. This news that De'Aaron Fox may be nearing a crossroads with the franchise. Biggest thing that stuck out to me in this one, it wasn't Tyrese Halliburton. He had a solid game, but he also took 9 of his 10 shots from 3, which he's been hitting his 3-ball more, but just not doing as much inside the arc. Had 8 assists. I thought he actually played some inspired defense by his standards on De'Aaron Fox. It forced him into a really difficult shot at the end of the third quarter, for example. And this one became a total blowout early in the fourth, where it starts to get out of hand. I think the Kings go down maybe like 12 or so. So Mike Brown's like, all right, we're getting smoked by TJ McConnell in the second unit. I'm going back with all my starters. And they immediately gave up an 8-0 run and the game was over. I guess still with the Pacers sticking with their backups. Sabonis did struggle to finish inside against Turner, and the Pacers' rim protection looked better in this game. I will note that particularly in the third quarter, that the Kings just missed a lot of layups that they probably just should have made. So that was not, I won't necessarily credit the Pacers entirely for how awesome the paint defense looked, at least statistically. My biggest takeaway was this is a return for Ben Shepherd, who'd been day to day, or at least these last couple of games. 14 points, 5 of 5 from the field, 4 of 4 from 3. And in marked contrast to Ben Mathurin, who somehow was plus 27 in this game while going 2 for 9. And this is one of those games where plus minus was not too accurate in his case. But he played 30 minutes. Remember, Neesmith is still out with this severe ankle sprain. And Andrew Nembhard is still, I think, on a minutes limit coming back from the sore knee because they didn't play him at all without Halliburton. And he had a nice little stretch because it was tied at halftime. Nembhard had a nice little stretch right at the start of the third in transition with like some nice slow down finishes against the Kings. Shall we say limited rim protection. So back to Shepherd I thought it was just so palpable because Mathurin, everything happens a beat late. Like he catches the ball, he doesn't shoot it. He holds the ball. Like the Pacers, they have so much offensive pace in the half court. That's how they want to play. Either someone is moving quickly with the ball or you give it up and then you cut. And so Mathurin he can't do it. He can't make the quick decision to shoot it. He'll then just sort of instead of just making a pass to someone else, he'll sort of just dribble all the way over to the other side of the floor and wait for someone to go set him a screen, or someone drives along the baseline and he's just a second late making the slot cut, which has really been in vogue. Talked about how the Grizzlies are doing a lot of that. He's just a second late making that cut and someone steps in front of him and knocks it away. I think it was DeMar DeRozan. It's not exactly the most intimidating quick twitch help defender in the world, but Mathurin is just late. And so Shepherd comes in and he just had a number of really nice plays. He had a beautiful cut against the zone at the end of the third quarter that the Kings had gone to just along the baseline, where that if the zone is matched up in a certain way, you can go from corner to corner, you're getting an open corner three, so he drained that one. There was another one where they're kind of stuck in semi-transition. The ball comes to him on the left wing, and there's 3 guys kind of all standing around him. There's only one guy on the weak side. So he just instinctively knows, get rid of the ball immediately, throw it up to the top, and then he's going to balance the floor by chasing his own pass and going to set a ghost screen, go into a pick and pop to the opposite side of the floor where there isn't anybody. And that's just a great move to make, just to balance the floor out so you're not too crowded. But he also managed to get himself a wide open pick and pop 3. And I think he's a very heady defender, even if he's a little undersized. He's getting stronger. I honestly, it's not going to happen because of just the investment they have in Mathurin, but I think he would fit much better with the Stars. And just seeing seeing them with a shooting guard, even if it's only in this one game, like Shepard's not the highest volume guy, but even in this only one game, to see like, oh man, this is like kind of what it looked like with Buddy Hield last year. Like I was like, yeah, man, like get this guy more time. And he was someone who didn't impress me early in his career last year, but I think he's steady and he knows how to play, and like that's very powerful in this system because they just need more guys who play off of other guys on this team.
It's interesting. When you were talking about Ben Shepherd, the guy that I was thinking about, which is a different criticism, but a related criticism, was Marquise Chris. And the shorthand that got used there was pattern recognition. So in Chris's
situation, Matherin and Marquise Chris have a lot in common.
Yeah, which is processing speed. But it's a similar thing, which is basically how long does it take for you to see what's going on? And some players can do that through anticipation rather than reaction. But it can be a huge problem. And sometimes you can make that up through speed and activity, but sometimes you can't. And with Matherin, I mean, I'm going back to processing speed. I remember talking about that with Caitlin Cooper after his first summer league. I'm just like, this is a really weird thing about Benedict Matherin, is that it seems like all this stuff's a little bit late. And there's still time for him to change. He's still a pretty young dude. One of the other things that stuck out to me about this one from the Pacers' perspective was, even with Aaron Nesmith still out, Rick Carlisle can actually play 10 competent NBA players. And I mean, I'm not the biggest Thomas Bryant fan, but when you can have the starters without Nesmith, of course, but McConnell, Shepherd, Toppin, Jarris Walker, and Thomas Bryant, like you're as we've talked about with the Pistons and a number of teams over the years, like when you don't have that deficiency within your rotation, it makes all this stuff work a lot better.
Yeah, and Bryant, the Heat didn't really use much of his three-point shooting ability these last couple of years, but that is something that he had started to really flash. Then he tore the ACL, and it's kind of been a road back for him. But he was 2 of 3 in this game. Like, they clearly are encouraging him to be a little bit more aggressive. Like, he can rebound. He even had a nice little help play on a block where the pass went behind him. He was guarding someone on the perimeter, and he tracked back into the lane, and I think it was Malik Monk who tried to, like, do a pump fake, and Bryant came out of nowhere and blocked it. So he does play hard. He's going to sprint the floor on this team, maybe get some offensive rebounds. He's going to struggle in pick and roll defense, but the Kings actually like aren't that great of a spread pick and roll team right now because they just can't make any shots. And yeah, the Kings will be a subject, I'm sure, next time we do one of these. But so yeah, getting Nembhard back has been big too. Miles Turner was awesome in this game, 2 steals and 2 blocks, 7 of 9 from the field. He also was able to be really good. Siakam struggled in the first half, and then he was getting inside in the third quarter, getting smaller Kings defenders on him, pinning him inside for quick transition plays. Yeah, this was definitely, I won't say proof of concept for the Pacers because it wasn't the greatest Halliburton game, but they didn't need him in the second half. They outscored the Kings by a ridiculous amount, 70-43 in the second half.
Yeah.
And quickly,
that's on the road.
Yeah. Jarris Walker, I just wasn't that impressed by his stint. He's kind of now on the fringes of the rotation once again, and he was better in the first half, but his 3-pointer just didn't look that great. He also had a play where he caught the ball in the middle of the zone, had Obi Toppin wide open for a dunk along the baseline, didn't see him. He's usually actually a pretty decent passer in short areas, but he didn't see him that time. He throws it up top to McConnell, then McConnell throws it to Obi Toppin for a layup, but it would have been an easier pass for Walker to just throw him the alley-oop, and didn't see a ton from him, good or bad defensively, but you're hoping that he was going to be a defensive impact guy. Where are we going next here?
I think we should go to a game you watched a little more intently, but I actually watched as well, which is it wasn't as competitive as we hoped. Cleveland, Milwaukee. We could start with the Bucks. I usually like to start with the stats for the losing team, which the Bucks were in this one after winning the NBA Cup championship. The Bucks are 15-12 on the season, 3-1 since the last 15-60. That does not include their non-regular season win. They still have a negative net rating. Negative 0.3 is 15th in the league. Of course, they've been much better since the slow start. 11th on offense, 19th on defense. And BPI projects them to win 46 games, which would be the 5 seed in the East. And part of the reason why we've been excited about this, the Bucks, of course, had the hot run going through the Cup. The Cavs have been one of the best teams in the whole league the whole season was, okay, you get these teams, the Bucks are playing really well. The Cavs have been playing really well other than their NBA Cup performance. And I thought that Cleveland looked great in this one, even without the context, but the context does matter here that Damian Lillard did not play at all, and the Bucks just never really got into a rhythm offensively.
Yeah, I thought for the first quarter, that Milwaukee played pretty well. They committed a terrible 3-shot foul.
Oh my God.
At the end of the first quarter, where Donovan Mitchell was pretending like he was going to shoot it and actually was almost certainly going to just buzzer clutch it. And then someone just like stuck their foot out and tripped him.
It was Chris Middleton.
Yeah, Chris Middleton on defense, every time I've seen him this year, which has probably been 4 or 5 times since we've been watching the Bucks so closely, it's been real bad. Like and I think he's going to get to where he needs to be a solid offensive contributor. But man, like he takes their team athleticism from poor to maybe untenable.
It's a very real concern. And before we move on from that terrible 3-shot foul, and yeah, Mitchell, like he kind of not pulls up, but kind of leans into it with like 0.7 left. He's not going to get anywhere. He's basically at his own 3-point line. That was bad, but it almost got exacerbated by an even worse foul. What happened was Gary Trent Jr. kind of, I guess he's trying to play hard. He goes and Max, I think it was Max Strus who's come back from this ankle issue, basically flies over him. But because Strus doesn't make contact with Trent until after the quarter clock has expired, it doesn't become another foul. So it was 2 fouls within 0.7 of a second, but the second one just became uncalled.
Yeah, it's just like even if you get the steal in that circumstance, there wouldn't have been enough time to get a shot up. That was an insane decision by him, and he got bailed out by the fact that there was so little time for the Cavs or for the Bucks to do anything.
And I was worried that he could hurt himself again, because it was like he flew over Gary Trent's back and like he didn't land on his ankle, but it was just like, oh man, like that would be a terrible way to get hurt again on a foul that never should have taken place. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. But yeah, Chris Middleton, he had some really bad fouls in the Orlando game and the Atlanta game too. So just something to keep an eye on here, that he's still is working his way back. And I'm not sure how much he's helping them. To where, and he'll close each half when it's close. Like he's kind of earned that right. They want to work him into that. He's on the 20-minute limit, but I don't think he's helping them right now. Another guy who didn't help them in this one offensively was Andre Jackson Jr. 0 of 4 from 3, all of them very good looks. And I think Andre Jackson also, I've noticed that he gets involved in a lot of miscommunications defensively, even though he is ostensibly their stopper. They had their transition defense in the second quarter, in particular, where they gave up 40 points, was just, and it was, some of it was Giannis missing a layup or thinking he got fouled and then kind of taking a beat and jogging back, or even after a make. Like they had one play where Giannis had a make, and Cleveland had a Sam Merrill 3 going through the net less than 4 seconds later. I actually like rewound it and counted because I wanted to see how long it was, because sometimes the play-by-play will mess that up. But yeah, the Cavs got a bunch of threes in the second quarter, just where even when Milwaukee was like largely back, and Bobby Portis and Jackson, Trent was getting involved in some of these miscommunications too, where they just couldn't, like they had numbers on numbers and they just couldn't get matched up and ended up giving up wide open 3-pointers. Trent was on Mitchell. This was not one of Trent's better games. They actually had Bobby Portis in a drop in this game, because I think they knew the Cavs had too much shooting and ball movement to put 2 on the ball there. They wanted to try it out with Portis in a drop, but Donovan Mitchell really hurt that. Trent either didn't direct the ball or Portis didn't call out the screen. Like they had a bunch of like, anytime Mitchell was coming downhill with a little bit of momentum at Trent and they flowed into a drag screen, like the game plan was to try to send him towards the sideline, and Mitchell was just able to abuse that and get to the basket a couple of times. And then that's what led Doc to go back to Andre Jackson Jr. on him, but then they couldn't score with Andre Jackson Jr. out there. For Giannis, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry, you're focusing on the Bucks out of
I forgot you watched more of this one. What did you have?
So I thought the biggest thing from Cleveland's perspective, other than you mentioned Donovan Mitchell and playing the drop, was Dean Wade in the starting lineup. I thought this was one of the best stretches I've seen Dean Wade play this year so far. He was confident with his jump shot, was 4 or 5 from 3, was competing defensively, had a couple of nice tipaways. And it's a reminder of just like what you and I were so excited about with the Cavs last year, especially when Strus was healthy, but also at times with Wade, when the times he was healthy last year and the shot actually went in, where they have another place that you don't really want to hide somebody with Wade. I thought he did some nice opportunistic attacks. And so I don't know what his ideal role is, like how you balance him and Strus. It's also notable that this game, I thought that, the Wade played confidently and Isaac Okoro's out for, I think it's roughly about 2 weeks with this shoulder issue. Like, can the Cavs find a rhythm with the two guys that I think are a better fit with their core 4 than Isaac Okoro is?
Yeah, now with Dame out, would have made more sense probably to start Wade anyway and get more size. You can switch across 3 positions in the starting lineup against Giannis. Giannis had 33 points. It was just asking too much for him, though. He was initiating off the dribble up top. Everything they were trying to do was screen out of the corner and then either pick and roll or hand off into an ostensibly open side pick and roll, which is tough to deal with. I thought Jared Allen's pick and roll defense was really good in the first half and particularly in the first quarter when they held him to 20 points. Evan Mobley, again, relatively ho-hum game, and he had one play where he tried to go at Giannis and got it tipped away, but still just so impressed by his poise finishing around the basket. 6 of 8 from 2. There's one play where he gets the ball on the baseline. Giannis is right there, and Mobley just pump fakes on one side of the rim, steps through without dribbling, and then just does a 180 turnaround dunk with 2 hands. And I just, he's going to be way up there in my most improved, at least if we were going to do it as of right now, he would be a huge candidate for me because I just didn't see this type of finishing ability coming for him. It's been incredibly impressive. And
overall, I really liked, and this has been true throughout the year, I thought that Cleveland's ball movement was really good, and they exploited some of the Bucks' comparative lack of athleticism and communication defensively, that they were able to get better looks in transition and semi-transition, but also in the half court. I thought that Cleveland did a really nice job there. And Giannis, I would say he did yeoman's work offensively. He did an extremely, everything that happened for the Bucks offensively that was good was through Giannis. It's just that there wasn't quite enough there. And I mean, considering who was out and everything else like that, like you take that as a mark for how good Giannis is. But Cleveland is a very good team. Their offense was absolutely humming in this one. And so the Bucks, after that strong, especially the first quarter before the very, very end, they just didn't have the horses.
Yeah. And the Cavaliers I'm just so impressed with their level of communication defensively. And there was a few times when they would get Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell stuck on Brook Lopez or Giannis and have to foul, or they front in the post and they're able to throw it up for an alley-oop. But there's only so many of those that, particularly when you're limited with your perimeter creation, that you can get. But what Cleveland does such a great job of that a lot of other teams don't is just their overall communication defensively. And so the plan was, because a lot of what Milwaukee is trying to do was AJ Green setting the screen for Giannis and then slipping out. And so the base plan was that they were not going to switch that they were going to hedge with Garland, and then he would try to get back to his man. But I don't think that my impression was that they don't necessarily change that up, but there are plenty of times where if Garland just couldn't get through it, then they would go for the switch, but they would call it out seamlessly. They wouldn't have these issues which the Bucks do oftentimes. If Lillard is involved, I thought they cleaned some of that up during their NBA Cup run, which was important. Also, teams probably didn't go after Lillard enough during that Cup run, quite frankly. But maybe Garland just gets hung up a little bit too much, or whoever's guarding Giannis can't quite get through the screen. And so they do have to go to a late switch, but they are able to call that out and not make a mistake. And so, yes, they're in a matchup that you don't love, but they're also not just like blowing it and just leaving nobody in front of Giannis or nobody in front of AJ Green. They're kind of having their cake and eating it too. Like some teams are just like, oh, well, we're just going to switch. But then, of course, you're just stuck in a bad matchup every time. They try to stay out of the bad matchup, but if they get stuck in the bad matchup, they don't miscommunicate and they still stay solid enough. And now they have at least, another rim protector behind the play, most likely. So whether it's peel switching, like all this stuff, they're so much more malleable defensively, not necessarily even in running various schemes, which they can, but just on an action to action basis of just making the decision that makes the most sense for how effective their initial defense was so that they're not going to have a breakdown.
It's a great point. One other thing on the Cavs that I had in my notes, Ty Jerome, who shot well in this game, he was over 50% from three. On the plus black box stats love him. Ty Jerome still shooting a strong 44% from three on the year, but 26% in December. And so, when somebody's far and above what they've been doing before, odds are they're going to come back to earth a little bit. That doesn't mean he's a bad player. Doesn't mean he's trash. But the idea that he was an offensive force, that always seemed overstated to me.
Couple other things from this one. Damian Lillard missed it with a calf issue. Doc Rivers has been in obfuscation mode on that. And he's probably more open than most coaches would be, but he also is probably cool with just lying through his teeth. When he's like, oh, I haven't talked to the medical staff. Like, Doc, it's been like 3 days. You didn't get an update.
What are you doing?
He's like, he wants to just for like in the legal profession, it's called like a Chinese wall, when you just have like these two parts of your firm that aren't supposed to talk to each other for ethical reasons, like representing two clients that like might be in conflict or something. So that's like Doc, he's just gonna not actually like the medical. It's like Glenn Grunwald trying to avoid Daryl Morey giving him the offer sheet at Summer League in the summer of 2012 for Jeremy Lin.
That led to all those rules changing.
So anyway, the Cavs are just rolling 25-4, 4-0 in their last since we last checked in on them. Number one in net rating, 12.5. Number one on offense, 122.7. 7th on defense, and they're projected to be 1 win ahead of the Celtics, 61 wins. And I mean, I probably, particularly because those teams will probably be fighting back and forth, I probably take the over on 61 right now. Like because it's just the system is working. Like they are just going. There are so many teams that just come into a game against them and just have absolutely no chance.
Injuries, I think, could be the thing that could tone it down, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, if Mobley or Mitchell or like, but even when they've rested guys, they've looked pretty decent. Yeah, we'll see. You're right. They have been, the big four have been extremely healthy so far, so that could be, and that is likely to happen. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't take the over on 61, but they also have only 4 losses, more than a quarter through the season.
Well, we can transition to a team that has slightly more than 4 losses, and that is the Charlotte Hornets.
Oh, we're going to this now, huh? All right, do we earmuffs, everybody? I guess I shouldn't say that about a podcast, but let's talk about Charlotte. Yeah, okay, I guess Ball is back. The Hornets are relatively watchable. They're 7-21 though, 0-4 in their last 4, -7 net rating. That's 26th on offense, 23rd on defense. They project for a 27-55 record, which would be 14th in the association.
And it would be
the Eastern Conference.
In the Eastern Conference. Also, I'd maybe in the association. I'd have to go back and look. And the team that they're ahead of in that stat is the team that they lost to in the game that I watched. Worth noting at the outset, there were a couple of absences in this one. Kyle Kuzma is still missing time with a sprained rib. He has now not played in almost a month. November 27th was his last game. And in this one, Brandon Miller didn't play. He's been dealing with an ankle sprain. I think he's missed 2 or 3 straight now. So the starting lineup for Charlotte was LaMelo Ball, Josh Green, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams, and I'm trying to remember who the last guy was. I somehow only had 4 starters in my notes. Anyway, it felt that
Well,
way.
that's
It was
did they
Seth
play
Curry. That's who it was. It was Seth Curry.
Yes,
And he had a couple threes early. And then for the Wiz, they had Champagny was the starter alongside Bub Carrington, Jordan Poole, Bilal Coulibaly, and Alex Sarr. And so worth noting that LaMelo played in this game and then missed the next one. They were on a back-to-back and just got absolutely trucked by the Sixers in a game that I had on as I was kind of like doing other things, and then realized that Joel Embiid was playing and LaMelo was not, and that game went out of hand quickly. And I thought that it was a fun game in the fact that these are like 2 bad teams that were at least trying hard, and that they missed shots. Charlotte was 8 of 43 from 3, and some of those were aggressive takes by LaMelo, but they were playing hard. And I think that the biggest takeaway for me, and it's something that we talk about a fair portion during years, and it gets lost in the transition around the trade deadline, which was the Charlotte Hornets offense just falls off a cliff whenever LaMelo is in on the floor. And that includes games that he starts and the games that he doesn't play in, like that Sixers loss. And Vasilije Micic just can't really quite do it. But you juxtapose those minutes with I called them the professional minutes that the Wizards had, where they generally paired Malcolm Brogdon and Jonas Valanciunas together. And so that gives the Wizards bench lineups a place to go, a place to be offensively. And so you saw just them be able to take advantage of that. And I mean, the Hornets actually, in a game that they lost by 9, they outscored the Wizards in LaMelo Ball's minutes and generally the starters overall. And so it was something that you gained appreciation for, because especially with the rampant randomness that happens in the rest of the game, it's like, okay, you can run a Brogdon, Valanciunas pick and roll. And even though Valanciunas is not the greatest defensive player, he's going to set hard screens. He's going to work on the glass. And so it just gave them an identity in those 15 or so minutes. Brogdon played well enough that he then was more part of the close, but it was a world of difference between the 2 teams.
The decline of Micic, I mean, I don't know. He's never really been that effective in the NBA, if we're being honest, even though he's had some nice passing moments. Towards the end of last year, they were decent. But yeah, he was -17, and he played basically all of his minutes with LaMelo on the bench. And sure, like, he's not, you want to talk about professional, like, he still is probably the most professional between him and Cody Martin, I guess, is coming off the bench too. But in terms of the offensive, he's their best offensive player, and they don't really have any shooting around him to play spread pick and roll. So it's like he might be able to be effective in another role, but it's been too much of a lift for a guy who's kind of an average backup point guard.
Yeah, and LaMelo, he was firing away in this one, 18 3-point attempts in 34 minutes. But part of that was, especially without Miller available, they just didn't have other guys who could take shots or make shots with consistency. Seth Curry got a nice one early, but then was largely kind of on the periphery of the offense. And for the Hornets, like they could get a little bit in transition. I thought that they were playing reasonably hard, but their half court offense, they weren't really able to generate many advantages. And that also ties in with Alex Sarr. I thought that Sarr had a nice defensive game. I still don't know exactly what his ideal defensive role is going to be long-term. Like, I think that he makes more sense as a 5 than a 4, but Charlotte is not. I mean, Mark Williams had a few possessions where he just like beasted Alex Sarr, like got into position for a rebound, or just like got
and then Valanciunas came in and beasted him.
Well, sure, yeah, it's the pecking order, the food chain that happens with centers in the league.
I mean, I don't want to see what must have happened to Alex Sarr going against Jonas Valanciunas in training camp. Like hopefully those, and I mean, it's any Jordan Poole footage during training camp, he probably just insisted that everything be well, I guess it would be Draymond who neither of them really wanted that footage to get out, I would guess, with Poole and Draymond. But yeah, so no training camp footage survives for Sarr versus Valanciunas, I'm guessing.
No, and I thought that Mark Williams did a nice job. I mean, the Hornets are still an absolute mess, but I thought that he had a couple nice athletic plays defensively. But then Sarr, when Sarr when he was in position defensively, I thought he had a series of good blocks, but also like solid contests. And the Hornets don't have the greatest finishers, but I thought that Sarr was in place a lot of the time. And so there were real positives for him. And I've when I've watched the Wizards, I've generally, other than him, his lack of physical strength, I've generally believed that Sarr's instincts and his effort defensively are on point. The thing that struck me in this one, and he ended up hitting some big threes late, is that, and this is a combination of the creators that this team has. Bub Carrington is a work in progress. Jordan Poole, inconsistent. And then he doesn't play a ton with Brogdon. He did at certain moments in time where Alex Sarr just wasn't getting any like good looks, wasn't really getting dunks. The things that were around the basket were generally pretty contested. Really, the only thing he could get was like a pick and pop three. And Sarr hasn't been making those overall at the volume that you'd like this year. And so I think some of that is kind of, let's call it, a lack of offensive industriousness with Sarr, where he's not like working his way into position. Like, it's so funny.
But also I think he knows if he makes contact with someone, like, he's going to be the one going backward at this point.
That's also true. And so I thought that just the nature of where he was getting his touches and where he was getting his attempts, like, yeah, okay, you give Alex Sarr the ball 20 feet from the basket, he's not skilled enough to make that work. And he has for a player who's kind of at his stage in development, I thought that Sarr had some nice passing vision moments where it's like, okay, like he tried to throw one over the top to Corey Kispert, who actually had a big stretch. I think it was the late third when the Wizards kind of started pulling out the lead. But he just doesn't quite have, he doesn't have the passing vocabulary yet. So you could argue that's a good thing and a bad thing. Like, it's a good thing because he's seeing passes that most 7-footers don't. But will he ever be that guy? I'm not entirely sure. So like with Sarr, offensively, still very skeptical, still very much a work in progress. Defensively, he can do some things, already has. And the other big difference with these teams is that, like, as I said, LaMelo took 32 shots in 34 minutes, 18 threes, was that Jordan Poole was the best offensive player in the game. Like, he picked his spots a little bit better. He wasn't horrendous turning the ball over. He hit some big shots, but was also willing to defer in the minutes they played together to Brogdon, and sometimes Bub Carrington had something going. But so LaMelo kind of knew that the whole thing was on his shoulders and played that way. Jordan Poole didn't, and Jordan Poole was the better for it.
Yeah, there was some talk maybe that Poole could even be involved in a trade with Denver. And I wouldn't recommend that because I think Poole is, even more so than Zach LaVine, is someone who's going to struggle defensively. But you can't sneeze at 28% usage and 59% true shooting. He's fallen off a little bit since early on, and he also is turning it over a crazy amount still. But sure, at least it's clear that he remembered how to shoot again, which it wasn't entirely clear. And do you want to talk a little bit about Mark Williams? What did you saw for? What did you?
Yeah, I thought that he, offensively, it's trying to get downhill after setting a screen, and hopefully LaMelo could find him for a pass. That happened a number of different times. He took 12 shots in 19 minutes, and I thought Williams was active defensively. He got his hands on a couple of passes, was deflecting things around. So like, he's still clearly working his way back physically, but I thought that he wasn't the reason the Hornets lost this game. I'll put it that way. I thought he played reasonably well. I wouldn't say
he has a 32 PER in 84 minutes so far.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he played well. It's more converting the opportunities, but he created some of those through effort. And I thought that his defense was meaningfully better to me than Nick Richards was. And so that's nice. Richards got on the offensive glass, but I didn't think he was, creating as many difference making plays. We'll save.
How about Salon?
Oh my God!
He only played 16 minutes, but
yeah,
I see you have a few things in here about him.
Yeah, I mean, so Salon, in a game where LaMelo Ball took 18 3-pointers, Tisha Salon, I think, took the most aggressive ones in the entire game. He took a step back three that I'm still processing how it happened. Like, he wasn't in position and then stepped back even further and just bricked it badly. And Salon, I'm still because you think about, okay, he's a gangly guy. He's a little bit weird in terms of the way he moves. And I thought maybe that could create some advantages for him drawing fouls that hasn't really materialized yet. And this is something that I'll need to do more work on later. But I don't understand how Tijan Salon is only converting 39% of his twos. Like the 3-pointer not going in, okay, small sample, wasn't totally sure going in, all that type of stuff. But like, at least do the things that you can do and try to do. But it's just, yeah, I wonder what his place is. And Salon's still a big guy. Like maybe he could eventually be like a change of pace, small ball 5, like if he can ever make a shot. But I thought it was speculative with how early the Hornets took him, and the early film when I've watched him, but also when you look at the stats, is not good.
So 33.3% contested finishing.
Ooh.
That is down there.
Speaking of depressing stats, I watched this on the Wizards broadcast. They mentioned as the game started that before this game, because somebody had to win, the Wizards and Hornets had combined for 2 wins in their last 31 combined games. That's bad.
And speaking of which, the Wizards stats 4-22, but they did win this one, 1-3 in their last 4. Negative 16.1 net rating. They also had a respectable loss at Milwaukee. Ryan Rollins' revenge game, by the way. He started for Milwaukee because they decided they needed a point guard after Giannis was basically the point guard against the Cavs, and that didn't really work. And so they only lost by 11 in that one. 30th on offense, 30th on defense. How far away are they from 29 in both of those? That's an interesting question.
So
what are their chances of getting the double?
On defense, they're less than a point per 100 possessions behind ahead, however we're going to define terms here. And then on offense, they're 2.2 ahead. And the team that's closest to them is New Orleans, who presumably at some point will be slightly healthier than they are so far. A couple of notes that I had that I just going through it on this game. The best single play, was a beautiful one-handed catch and dunk by Bilal Coulibaly. I thought that he disappeared for long stretches in part because Jordan Poole was playing well, but you did get a pop of that athleticism with him. And then the best play from Sarr, I mentioned how he had a couple nice blocks. The single best one, except that it started with a mistake. Mark Williams cut behind Alex Sarr, and then Sarr recovered for the block. And it was just like, oh yeah, he can cover ground quickly. So he shouldn't have given up the position that he did, but he was able to recover. That was one of his 3. I actually thought he should have been credited with a 4th block. So like Sarr, I think he will be able to do some stuff on that end. It's just, will he be great enough on defense to cover up for his offense, or will his offense get better enough that it's not the cataclysm that it is right now?
Let's move to the Pistons.
Yes. The Detroit Pistons are 12-17. 2-2 since the last 15-16. Remember, they were in the group stage of the NBA Cup until the very, very end, until they got worked by the Bucks. Negative 3.8 net rating is 22nd. They are identical 20th on offense and defense so far in the season, and they're one spot out of the play-in, 34-48 per BPI.
Yeah, they had that huge comeback against the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat have had some atrocious losses, one of which we will cover in due time on this podcast this season. But they then, after that great comeback win against Miami, they beat Phoenix in Phoenix, and Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal both played in that game. Devin Booker did not, however, and they overcame 48% three-point shooting by the Suns with 48% three-point shooting themselves on a higher volume. And Tobias Harris came back in that one. Didn't do a ton, only took 5 field goal attempts. And Tim Hardaway Jr. is still in the starting lineup. And of course, they're bringing in Malik Beasley as well. Those 2 guys have been awesome shooting the ball of late. So there's a saying, one of my favorite podcasters is Dan Carlin of the Hardcore History podcast. And he did this great 5-parter on the Japanese and their role in World War II. And he started off with the phrase, the Japanese are like everyone else, only more so. Tobias Harris is like himself this season, only less so. He's doing all of the same things that Tobias Harris used to do, but just smaller percentage of the time and less of it. So 12.7% of the time he possesses the ball. Like, this is a guy who's brought in to, in theory, be their second best offensive player. I think that was their idea behind Cade. His overall usage, scoring usage plus turnovers, about 18%. So obviously below 20%, which is average. And passing creation is only 4.9%. He only sets up 4.9% of Detroit's shots with a pass. That is pretty ugly. At least he never turns it over. And pick and roll isolation has just been pretty much totally ineffective at this point in time. Zoom in on the data here. And he, on either pick and roll and isolation, he just does not get to the basket in any way. So he has gotten to the rim twice all year out of pick and roll.
Oof.
And 5 times all year out of isolation. So he's actually shooting a really good percentage at the rim, but it's pretty much all like little fast breaks or maybe a quick cut for a layup. He is not able to put any kind of pressure on the basket. And that's disappointing because you'd think there would be all these opportunities, particularly out of isolation or post-ups, where he gets a smaller player on him, like they're putting their best guy on Cade, and he might be able to overpower that guy. But that's part of why he's never gotten to the free throw line. Of course, he's not doing that again this year. And then his three-point shooting has not been as good as normal. I think that's the one thing that could get better. He's at 34% from three, and that same number on uncontested threes.
Mm-hmm.
Career, he's at 39% on uncontested threes. And the other thing is that 61% of his threes are uncontested. That's actually above league average. Again, for a guy who's supposed to be a scorer, I mean, for those who watch Tobias Harris closely, you shouldn't be surprised by it at this point, but he's basically not hunting those shots and taking it when he's wide open, generally from lower on the floor. Like, he just hasn't been involved that much in actions higher on the floor. Like, it's been a lot of standing in the corner. Maybe he'll try to slip into a quick post up or ISO on occasion or get out in transition. But yeah, they certainly are not putting the ball in his hands up top at all. And so he's kind of been more of a baseline to baseline style of player. And he's only taken 41 jumpers off the dribble. He's 15 of 41 on those. So there just isn't, he just isn't. It used to be like, all right, maybe he's not that bad on defense. Hey, he can do a little scoring for you. Get to some floaters, maybe like hit some open shots. And you're like, maybe like he's gotten better defensively. So maybe he doesn't have that many weaknesses. But now it's at the point these last 2 years where he just doesn't have any strengths. Yeah, we lost Danny there for a second, and I will make a note of this time to edit it on the podcast.
I will, while we're editing it, I was clicking in on Dunc'd and threes and accidentally clicked the little red box. Sheer incompetence on my part. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the internet.
I was sheer operator error.
Fair enough. It can happen. What time was this? When did that happen in the show? How long has it even been? I don't know. Hour and 15 minutes, hour and 14, something like that. Okay. Let's get back to work here. So anyway, you already know everything that I'm telling you about Tobias Harris. That he just has whatever they signed him to be, he hasn't been that. He basically just doesn't have. He's gone from not having any weaknesses to not having any strengths, I would say, is kind of where he's ended up at this point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The thing that Tobias Harris does have, though, is that he at least is forward sized, and he hasn't been like he's not.
Yeah, and he still is like he's not someone that opposing teams are just like not guarding or something like that.
Exactly, and as much as you and I banged the drum for Simone Fontecchio, he hasn't had the greatest year either. Fontecchio, for those of you who are interested in this. Well, I guess he does have 56% true shooting. It's just that his usage rate is super duper low.
I think Fontecchio would actually be better for them than Harris.
So do I.
But obviously the branding would not support that or their salaries. So, yeah, Pistons, very encouraging. I like, having Tobias Harris as just a guy who's not Isaiah Stewart or Marvin Bagley trying to play the four. Yes, that is certainly helpful. Having, just as you were talking about with the Wizards, another actual professional player in there who is a veteran, who's not going to totally screw up, who's not going to just kill you in any one particular area. That is valuable. It's not $50 million over 2 years worth of valuable by any means. Where are we going next year?
We're going to Atlanta.
Exciting. I haven't spent any time in Atlanta in a long time. They are 14-15 and 1-3 since we last checked in. Their loss, of course, in the NBA Cup semifinal did count, although the final for OKC and the Bucks did not. Negative 2.0 net rating is 20th, 17th on offense, 17th on defense, and they project for the 9 seed, 38 and 44, 43% chance of making the playoffs. Trae Young did not play in their loss Saturday to the Grizzlies, and Dyson Daniels has been a massive revelation on the defensive end, helping the Hawks get to respectability there. But offensively, what's it looked like for him?
Not fantastic. And I mean, if you want the kind of the big ones that we usually use, 51% true shooting on 18 usage. Important to note that 18% basketball reference usage for Dyson Daniels, that is not only a career high, that's basically a third higher than his previous career high, which was 12.6. So if you want the kind of counting stats, 13 points, 3.4 assists, 5 rebounds, and 3 steals. He's still at 3 steals per game.
Yeah, that is remarkable. And the outside shot has been a struggle. You're going to talk about that in a second, but he has at least been scoring better inside the arc. His floater is still a big part of his offense, 33% of his field goal attempts, but he is getting to 67% in the restricted area. And that was a worry that I had about him from the lower levels, of, especially because he's really not a 1-foot jumper. He's a 2-foot jumper, of how he would finish. And he's been pretty solid there with his touch, because he doesn't take that many dunks either. And a lot of those are off of his own fast break plays. And our contested finishing number says he's 51.3%. That's a little bit below league median, but also for him in particular, because he takes a lot of floaters, that's not as troubling of a number to me, because that number is actually that. I mean, I wish it were inside of 5 feet. It's not. It's inside of 10 feet. That's the number that we get from NBA.com. But he is 51.3% on those. And given that he takes a lot of these floaters, that's not like an awful number. And so I think this is, and he's had moments where he's been able to use his size, get in the lane. He had that great game, obviously, when they beat the Celtics on the road in cup play. So the inside the arc, I think it's been all you reasonably could ask for from him. And he's been able to be somewhat aggressive off of closeouts. And you think that floater, if he can't get all the way to the rim, is a reliable shot in the half court setting.
It is. And so if unless we're counting, because one of my criticisms with Dyson Daniels is that he's not getting to the line at all, just 1.6 free throw attempts per 36. When you consider his increased part within the Hawks offense, like that's not good enough. Like you want that to be a little bit higher. So if you group that with inside the arc, which I loosely do, that's one flaw. But then the other one is that Dyson Daniels' 3-pointer is still not falling. He shot 31% from 3 his rookie year, 31% his second year, 31% so far this year. And he's only taking 4.1 per 36. That is the highest attempt rate of Dyson Daniels' career, but it's still not a great attempt rate. That means that he's not taking them very often, and he's missing the ones that he takes. Also, Daniels is a career 63% free throw shooter and has actually gotten worse from the stripe by, not a huge percentage, but he's gotten worse from the stripe each of his NBA seasons. So it's not like, oh, we're seeing growth there. Maybe that'll at some point present itself. So briefly, I'm not going to mention all of the guys. I looked this up because I'm like, well, how is 1.6 free throw attempts per 36? Like, where does that work out? And so some of the guys last year who had played over 1,000 minutes, who had a usage rate over 17, got to the line 1.6 or fewer. Javon Carter, Peyton Pritchard, George Niang, and then, because it amuses me, DeAndre Ayton, just because he never gets fouled.
Yeah, but other than Ayton, I would guess that Daniels takes a higher proportion of his shots at the rim than any of the guys that you had on this list. And because he's more of a 2-foot player, and because he's a guy who's going to shoot a lot of floaters, that leads to just not, or a lot of his plays too are kind of working on his own man and then spinning for a little floater at the dotted line or something like that. Like, yeah, he's just not really going to get fouled on those types of plays, even if he is technically shooting in the paint a fair amount.
He is. And so something I wanted to look up, this is something that I really like having access to, is that 77% of Dyson Daniels threes are uncontested. That's about what Christian Brown and Jaden McDaniels do. So teams are letting them shoot, but not the crazy like at 90% or something what some of those guys have. And something that's wild about his shooting splits is that Dyson Daniels, he shoots basically 31%. However you split the pie, pull up threes versus catch and shoot, both 31%. Uncontested threes versus contested threes, both 31%. If that number was better, that would be encouraging, but it's not. And so that's not great. And as you brought up, he takes a lot of, he doesn't get to the basket a ton. I was looking in some of the pick data that we have from Sport Radar, and Dyson Daniels has received 71 picks and has gotten to the rim twice on those 71. He's actually been successful.
Yeah, but received in the sense that he has gotten the pick and then actually something happened out of it, either a pass directly to a shooter or a shot or a turnover.
Yes. Thank you very much for clarifying that. The numbers are good when the ensuing shots are mid-rangers, but it's still, we're talking 21 total shot attempts on more of the jumper varietal. And so with Daniels, so the fundamental question is not, is he a good or even a great defender? I mean, at this point, it seems pretty clear that he is. It's, is he doing enough offensively to justify, like to be viable? And I'd say he's kind of at that borderline. Something that I found interesting is that he was, he's been negative in offensive EPM both of the last 2 years. I firmly agree with that, but he's been really great defensively. And so that's pushed him over it made him a positive in terms of EPM. Not that that's gospel, but I think that this is the core conceit, is that basically Daniels, he's a great defensive player and a very limited offensive player. So it's, can you handle that and be a viable enough team? And in the circumstance where you don't have guard depth or where you need somebody to do what he can do, then absolutely. And he's shown growth. And I'm not going to write off Dyson Daniels, like his offensive game. This is age 21 season and he's battled a bunch of injuries, but he needs to get significantly better on his weaknesses in order to be a, no doubt about it, starter and get paid accordingly.
Yeah, that's a great point about what he's going to get paid, because is he Herb Jones, his former teammate? I think Herb Jones is more viable. And also has more size. Like Herb, I think, is better as a driver than Daniels. Certainly has been more confident as a shooter. Daniels has like a little bit of point guard skills, but that's, I don't think that's ever going to happen for. I don't think his handle is that great. He gets a little nervous on the ball too. Mm-hmm. That's another reason I'm sort of like, is his shooting going to come around? Like he misses free throws. Like he just kind of plays this nervous offensive game overall. Like some of his moments, for example, in the Olympics. Were like that. When Dante Exum came in and had to settle them down, and they stopped playing Daniels.
I'm happy you brought up Exum, because there are also examples of these athletic guys who have a good floor game, eventually piecing enough of it together to become more viable offensive players. But none of them have ever, that I can think of, ever gone to being like a good offensive player. They just become better offensive players.
Yeah, but so are we talking about Herb Jones when not anyone was sure that he could shoot? Are we talking about Matisse Thybulle and what he got paid? Certainly the cap's going up, so it'll be more than 11 or 12 million on an extension, but you're kind of still looking at more in that 15 range, because he's not a true two-way player, and he's a guy you just have to make a lot of compromises around, I would say, on the offensive end. All right, should we move on here? Who's next? Maybe I should decide that, actually. How about the Toronto Raptors?
Let's do it. The Raptors are 7-22 on the season, but 0-5 since the last 15-60. They're, of course, still dealing with injuries. We'll get into that in a sec. Negative 4.4 net rating is 23rd, 24th on offense, 22nd on defense. And just to briefly run through their current injuries, Manuel quickly is still not ready for full contact drills. He's dealing with this elbow issue. Jakob Poeltl is out with a groin issue. And then RJ Barrett didn't play against their narrow loss, narrower than I would have expected, against the Houston Rockets with an illness. And so that put a lot more on the rest of their team.
Before we get into this, Houston 114, Raptors 110. Dylan Brooks shot 14 free throw attempts. I do not know the answer to this, and maybe you can look it up while I'm talking about some of the stuff, of whether that is a career high for Dylan Brooks. I'm going to say that it is a career high 14 free throw attempts for a guy who is not known for his ability to get to the foul line. The Canadian.
I have the answer.
Okay.
It ties his career high. He did. He was 11 of 14 way back in April of 2018. When
that was his rookie year, wasn't it?
Yeah,
when he was just the usage hog on a tanking Memphis team.
That is exactly correct. And so he did it. He did it in that game.
That's what always kills me on these career highs. If the guy's been on a tanking team, there could just be some ridiculous game that just is not NBA basketball.
Yeah, and remember, that wasn't one of the fun, like, suicide Grizzlies teams. That was just one of the bad Grizzlies teams.
So, start with Scotty Barnes coming back from this ankle issue, which there was talk was going to keep him out for a while. He really struggled in this one. 2 of 15 from the field. They closed it out with him at center, and he had a couple of decent drives at Alperen Sengun. I thought they should have gone to that more, but it just didn't really make a ton of sense for him to be taking 8 threes, and they weren't particularly great quality, I thought, either. And then they didn't go nearly as much with the playmaking with him as they've been doing this year. Remember, he had that passing creation of 19%, and that he only had 4 assists in this one. And that Raps actually shot it pretty well from downtown. So Barnes, here's a struggle for him. He's coming back from this ankle, which maybe is a pretty difficult injury, and they figured out a way for him to play on it, but he's not 100%. That seemed pretty obvious given his lack of aggression inside the arc, and particularly when he's being guarded by a center a fair amount too, although they still did a pretty good job of keeping Sengun out of the action, guarding guys in the corner. The big star, though, is your guy, Jacoby Walter. I know you want to do a full breakdown on him, but I'll limit it to what I saw in this game. He had 14 points very early on as the Raps went up 42-26. I like the fact that he was able to get up 11 threes in 28 minutes. So he's getting those off, hit a nice pick and pop for one of them as well. So 27 points for him. He did foul out, committed some pretty dumb fouls, including one on Brooks.
He can do that.
Hurt them. Yeah. It really hurt them when and he was really upset. They had already used a challenge on a foul that he had taken earlier that also was unsuccessful. So they couldn't challenge that one. He claimed that he had gotten Brooks on the arm. And Walter is pretty thin still. Brooks was able to go through him and get to a mid-ranger. Then Walter felt like he needed to reach in. It was just a bad foul because they were only down 3 in the last minute of the game there with the shot clock off. And so if he could have just stayed solid, and you want to force the other team to make a shot in that circumstance, particularly when just hitting 1 out of 2 is going to end the game. So that wasn't great, but I thought his overall activity level and how well he moves his feet both on the ball and as a help defender was pretty exciting. And then Grady Dick didn't have the highest usage in this one, but he hit a couple of really difficult threes in terms of his footwork going to his right. One was a flyby where he stepped to his right, and another one was coming off a screen. So he kind of has this long wind up, but he is increasing the speed of his release, and I'm liking what I'm seeing from him a lot this year. So these are 2 guys. Now, they're both shooting guards. RJ Barrett, who didn't play in this one, also a shooting guard. They still don't have a 3. Scotty Barnes is definitely not shooting it well enough to play the 3. This season, he's at 30% from downtown. But it's good to see, and even Ochai Agbaji has had a renaissance there. They used him a lot, actually, as a screener because they were trying to hide the big on him. And so he got some nice quick slips to the rim. Actually, was 6 of 11 from 2, which, I mean, that 11 2-point attempts might be a career high for Ochai Agbaji, although he's had some weird games for this team this year, too, with guys out. But, yeah, he was pretty solid. And so, yeah, those guys are all shooting guards. but they at least have managed to develop them, and some of them have, like Abaji and Barrett, have the toughness to play the three in a lot of matchups. That's pretty much how Abaji has been deployed this year. They also started Jonathan Mobo, and I'd really been wanting to get more eyes on him, and it just wasn't the best game for him. He had one awesome quick rip through on Jabari Smith from the elbow for a dunk, but didn't really do much of anything else. Didn't have any offensive rebounds. He only played 16 minutes. They started him, I guess you would say, at center, because they've had Pirtle out with this groin issue that he came back from, and then it must have re-injured.
Yeah, and I think it's telling that Rajakovic is not starting Kelly Olynyk in this, that they're going in other directions. I think because they're not even starting Boucher. They're just playing both those guys coming off the bench. But the guy that I'm most interested in, kind of your thoughts outside of Jacoby Walter, who I'm going to do a breakdown of him whenever we get the chance, is Jamal Shead, another rookie that is on the Raptors who ended up closing in place of Mobo. How do you think he looked?
Yeah, his ball pressure I think has ramped up throughout the season. I didn't see as much from him in Summer League. Of course, because you never get the Raptors feed because it's Canadian for whatever on League Pass on TV at least. So it was the Rockets announcers, they were familiar with Shead because he went to Houston and kind of talking up his defense. But I thought he did have 10 assists in this game and 11 points. And I didn't think so much of it was him creating stuff. It was more just sort of caretaker. Jacoby Walters coming off a screen for a three. Jamison Battle, who is kind of a funny player, I'll talk about in a little bit, is open for a three. Those sorts of plays where it's and he'll push it a little bit in transition, but he was the only quote unquote point guard available for these guys that they wanted to play. And I thought he looked reasonable there. Like there's that player type of Javon Carr, Davion Mitchell, who actually was available, I think, in this game. He might have had a shoulder issue, but they didn't play him at all. They just went with Shead. And they started, actually, Barnes, Abaji, Walter, Dick, and Mobo. So 2 power forwards and 3 shooting guards was their starting lineup. But, yeah, they kind of decided that they wanted that additional ball handling. They also wanted someone who could get over a screen a little bit better. So Shead, again, certainly is never going to have the offense to be a starter, you would think, but and his jumper does need a lot of work. He kind of takes a while to get it off. It's like this deep set shot, so that's not amazing. And if he's really going to be a guy who can play next to good players, he's got to improve that jumper. But he certainly is someone who has like NBA level of talent. I would say is looking like a good pick for them. So yeah, he would be another interesting Raps development guy.
And since you mentioned him, Jamison Battle, not somebody that I think we've ever brought up on the podcast. I mean, maybe in the Summer League breakdown, started out his college career at George Washington, then bounced around a little bit. I think it was at Minnesota, then finished it at Ohio State. So he's already 23. But if he can shoot, then he has a place. It's just, can he shoot well enough?
Yeah, he shoots it kind of like Joe Ingles, right? Is a lefty. Right elbow way out to the side, but minimal dip. Doesn't have that level of ball handling. He kind of is more of a power forward sort of guy. A little bit evocative of Sasha Vezenkov as well, though he doesn't have the same shot motion. But just think of that body type and level of athlete. And they actually did put him in once Walter fouled out, and so I think he can at least make an open shot and play hard and be a big body. Maybe get a rebound or two. We'll see. This was not that real of a game. Houston, for all of their talent, isn't a team that's going to really like spread you out and try to go by you, and to where someone like Battle's foot speed could be questioned. But he was an interesting guy. He at least made some shots. So keep an eye on him. It's my first time really getting a look at him. Where are we going next here?
I was thinking we could do Philadelphia. 9-17 on the season, 2-2 since the last 15 and 60. Negative 5.3 net rating still. That's 24th in the league, 27th on offense, 13th on defense, and their projected BPI is calming down on them. 39 wins would be the 8th seed, and so that's not fantastic. And I mentioned that I watched a little bit at the very early part. So I was a little bit pissed off with the Sixers. I mean, this is the type of thing that happens. It's not necessarily anyone's fault that they played Joel in a game against the Hornets where LaMelo wasn't playing and just like crushed them like almost immediately. And then since Joel's not playing on back-to-backs, then he sits the next day when they're playing the Cavs and they get run absolutely just crushed by the Cavs.
Yeah, Cavs shot 51% from three. Paul George did play in the back-to-back, however. And with this team being 27th on offense still, and Joel came back, he looked fine in that Hornets game. We'll, of course, see if he can string some non-back-to-back games together. But their shooting has just been so weird this year. And if guys could just get back to their established levels, that would really help a lot here. So Caleb Martin is one really interesting guy. Danny is at 49% true shooting. His shot making, which is our metric of what is your field goal percentage compared to what we would expect based on where you're shooting from and how contested it is -6. So he's not, but then the other thing is he's not even like taking good shots. So his simple shot quality is well below the league average, or the median is 53% field goal percentage. He's at 51.6. You'd think, oh, Caleb Martin, like, all right, so he's going to take wide open threes and he's going to attack closeouts and get to the basket, or he's going to get out and transition off of pick sixes. And somehow 51% of his shots are self-created, and he's shooting terribly on those, 39.5% field goal. And then on the team-created stuff, he's well below league average as well at 52%. And here's the other thing that's crazy, though. You're like, oh, he's shooting it so poorly. He's doing this dolphin kick thing. He's actually hitting 40.7% of his uncontested threes, but only 52.9% of his threes are uncontested.
Wow.
Again, that is a below league average for a guy who's not a contested 3-point shooter. And he's shooting 16.7% on contested threes. So, and he's actually surprisingly decent at that 34% career. So, but the idea is he's supposed to be getting wide open ones, and can he start to get those and make them when they get a steady diet of Joel?
Yeah, and I think that the way that I would describe Caleb Martin's offensive season so far is that he's taking harder / worse shots than last year with Miami, and he's making fewer of them. He's making fewer of the easy ones and fewer of the hard ones. You brought up how 51% of Martin's shots are self-created. That was below 44% last year with the Heat. He did a better job on those self-created shots, in part because you're taking fewer from them. They're generally going to be a little bit better. And some of this is also just the regression of the mean stuff that'll happen. You know, like he did better. He shot around his career average on contested threes last year. If that goes up, it'll look better. But I think that the idea that he's taking harder shots and doing worse from both, that puts it in about the right context for me.
Yeah, and then Tyrese Maxey, we thought, had established himself as one of the best shooters in the NBA, and he's not taking the easiest shots. He's not getting as many easy ones playing off of Joel, but you would think it would be an issue more of him not getting as many shots than not making them. And so for a guy who's an on-ball guy, you would expect him to make 51.7% field goal percentage, but he's -4.2 shot making on that. So his field goal percentage is only 47.6%, and his 3-point shooting is really, really bad. That's because he's only hitting 24% of his contested threes. That career number is 36.5%. And he's shooting 39% on uncontested threes, which is not worse than his career 40% in any meaningful way. So Tyrese, again, like, he's had to take a lot more shots. I think he just plays a billion minutes. Maybe he's a little bit tired. He started off the season really poorly. Then he had the hamstring. But this, like, even compared to where he was last year when Joel didn't play, this is like way below that. Like, we kind of established that he's dependent on Joel in a lot of ways because to play that pitch and catch game with him. But this is just a whole new level of utility, and you think it's going to get better, right?
You
I
think
don't see
so?
any reason to think it wouldn't be.
And some of the stuff that, looking at it a little bit with Maxey's kind of shot profile, you do expect to get a little bit better in time. So Maxey, he's below 50% from two for the first time in his career. He's only at 48. So it's not like he's way, way below what has been his standard, which is just shade over 50. But something that stands out in that is that Maxey, he only takes about a fifth of his shots in the restricted area, but he had been hovering in the like mid to high, in like the mid 60s for the last few years in that area. He's at 57% so far this year. And I do think that Joel Embiid's absence is a part of that story because the defenders are just occupying a different space. They're more around the basket, all that. Maxey, he has 5 dunks on the year, and that is actually more than he's had the last couple of years, but it's not like a ridiculous number. So that means he's probably getting more contested finishes, and they're not going quite as well.
And then Paul George, he's actually making more of his shots than would be expected, but his shot quality is way down, even compared to last year with the Clippers. Last year, he was at 50% expected, or we'll just call that his shot quality was 50% e-field goal. This year, it's down in the 46s.
Oof.
But the big problem for him is that he somehow is shooting only 27.8% on his uncontested threes. And for his career, at least as far back as we have tracking data on this, Paul George shoots 43.5% on uncontested threes. So he's 16% worse than would be expected on uncontested three-pointers. And so the off-ball stuff for him, working as a support player, we thought he was going to be this incredible compliment. But whenever he gets set up, he just can't make any of his shots. And he's at 46% on long twos. There are a lot of them. That's another reason why his shot quality is down by quite a bit. And then the team overall is shooting 28.1% on contested threes. And you would think, yeah, Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, you're going to be taking the bulk of those. Those are two of the best shooters in the NBA. They are shooting 29% on self-created threes. Again, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, like pretty good off-dribble three-point shooters. That's 27th in the NBA. And then they're also shooting 59% in the restricted area. That's a little bit more understandable with Joel out. Andre Drummond, with all of his tips and flubs around the basket, can really lower your shooting percentage in the restricted area. But they just are not making shots. Like, yeah, you can say the shot quality hasn't been that great and all that, and like it hasn't functioned without Joel, and Andre Drummond's been a big disappointment, and guys have had to take harder shots than be expected. All those things are true, but they just are not making even the good shots that they're creating. Like, that's step one, and I don't understand why this is going to continue. Like, it would be, maybe it's just really bad luck, but you can talk about all the injuries and stuff, that being bad luck. These are injury-prone players. I don't think Joel suffering like 3 of the 51 or something total facial fractures that have been suffered in the NBA in like the last 15 years. I think it was in Jeff Stotts' database. I don't think that that's anything other than bad luck, but they also would theoretically just be suffering from bad luck, their inability to make open shots for guys who should, like, if you're going to pick guys who would be really good at doing that before the season, you would have picked these guys.
And that is a reason to believe that there could be a regression to the mean, even if the other stuff doesn't get fixed right away, that they could just be better than they've been. And the Sixers are fortunate, as unfortunate as they've been for health purposes, that teams aren't running and hiding from them. There's more vertical room to roam in terms of if they can figure it out. They just have to actually do it. And so we'll see if that can actually happen.
Next up,
Brooklyn Nets.
11-17, 1-3 since we last checked in on them. They have a negative 6.0 net rating now, which is 25th in the NBA. And they are 18th on offense. That number has been sinking of late. Defense has fallen off. They're actually, you'd think they shouldn't be quite this bad defensively, but they're 27th, 118.3. And they project still for 34 wins, the 11th seed per BPI. They will not be getting 34 wins this season. And Danny, I think by moving on for Dennis Schroeder, while Cam Thomas is also injured, I think they've finally done it.
The Brooklyn Nets have played 3 games since they traded Dennis Schroeder They have averaged 98.6 points and a 102.1 NBA.com offensive rating since the trade. Both of those are the worst in the league. They have won one of those 3 games because they beat the Raptors 101-94, a game I refused to watch. And so the idea was basically, and you saw this in the numbers, I brought this up when the trade happened, about how their offense has been pretty solid when Schroeder's been on the floor and when Cam Thomas was on the floor. I didn't look at one of those. It was just overall. They were around a 116 offensive rating with either one of those guys on the floor. And with neither of them on the floor, including these 3 games, the Nets are down to a 105.8 offensive rating in those 722 clean the glass possessions. That is 11th percentile. And it makes sense. I mean, you think about that, how few guys, and I think something that's illustrative of this is the starting 5 in the game that they won against the Raptors was Keon Johnson, Cam Johnson, Ben Simmons, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Nick Claxton. You don't have a lot of dribbling oomph in those sorts of lineups.
Claxton and Simmons together. Now they finally Schroeder played so well because their plan supposedly was they're actually going to start Ben Simmons at point guard, and then I think Schroeder was so good, and then they had Claxton out, so all right, we'll just move Simmons to center, and he's played pretty much exclusively at center, but now I guess he's playing point guard.
Yeah, I mean, he's having the ball in his hands the most, and especially with Cam Thomas out. Now, will they restructure this? Presumably, Cam Thomas is going to replace Keon Johnson when he's available. We don't know exactly when that's going to be, and so Brooklyn is, they're hemorrhaging points, and their defense isn't really good enough to make up for it. And this is, if you're Sean Marks and you get your own picks back, this is what you were looking for. You got that, you got that good start. And so, this is probably what we're going to see. I think they'll be competitive. They'll be feisty in some of these games. They still play hard. I was impressed. I watched a little bit of that Jazz game, and they lost at home, but they were still trying out there. And then another player on the Nets that has been a bright point that I think we need to appreciate, especially because he might not be on the Nets for forever, is Cameron Johnson. And so he's averaging a career high in points, rebounds, assists, and minutes per game in his age 28 season. Career high 66% true shooting on a career high 21.4 usage. And what's encouraging about it is Cam Johnson's always been a damn good shooter. He's taking and making threes. So he's making 42% of 8.4 threes per 36. And you think that's great, but it's not an outlier for Johnson. He's a career 40% 3-point shooter, and he's been around 8 per 36 the last few years. And even though he's taking more self-created now than before, it's still 91% of his 3-point attempts are assisted. So it's still very, very, actually that might be of the makes. I can't remember how Basketball Reference does their splits. So what's changing for Johnson is that he's actually getting to the free throw line at the best rate of his career, 4.3 per 36. That's not fantastic, but it's a lot better than he was doing. And Cam Johnson's making 59% of his twos. He's not the shot mix there. Like I actually, when I looked at it, and I've watched a fair amount of Nets, like that part of it actually seems somewhat sustainable. Now will it be, is it 59% versus 56 or 55? Yeah, that might be a little bit rosy. But the idea that Cam Johnson can kind of be this type of player, just a little bit more of the offense, taking a few more shots, like he's just being a more active version of himself. He's not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, if he's a fascinating thought on what would happen if he goes to a good team. Because one of the ideas I had was Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson and an unprotected first from the Nuggets to kind of get them out of tax jail and get someone who's actually might be a little bit better defensively than Porter Jr. at this point. Mm-hmm. They're probably about the same. Porter Jr. gives you a little more size, and then he can shoot it about as well. Like those guys are somewhat similar players to one another. But how many plays are you really going to run for Cam Johnson? Like, is he just going to be a glorified spot up guy who you can't leave, or can he really be a big part of a winning team? He certainly did that, of course, in Phoenix, although he came off the bench a reasonable amount for them too. Anything else on these guys?
I mean, when you look at Cam Johnson's most used player types, it's still the standard stuff, spot up, transition. He actually has run pick and roll a little bit this year, and that's gone fine. He's not going to be the most dynamic pick and roll scorer, but the idea that Johnson can be like he can kind of be this guy in a slightly larger or smaller role is encouraging. There were times in Brooklyn where he's explored the studio space, and I haven't loved that. More watch it, more eye test than the stats. The stats are fine, but he's flawed defensively, has all this stuff, but I mean, he can still shoot the hell out of the ball.
Yeah, Maz says in the comments, you consider MPJ a spot up guy? Yeah, I think so. They run plays for him, some going to his left, but I think he's mostly a spot up guy. I guess the difference between being a spot up guy and someone that you're running plays from, it can be, or for, excuse me.
Like I think they use as a difference between the two. Like the Nuggets use MPJ shooting more in motion than the Nets do with Cam Johnson. I don't know whether Cam Johnson could do that, but that's just how they're used.
All right, let's talk about the Magic and the Heat. The Magic had one of the best comebacks in NBA history against the Heat over the weekend, coming back from 22 down at the start of the fourth.
And so we'll start with Miami stats. They are an even 13-13 on the season by virtue of them going 1-3 since the last 15-60. They're still 11th in cleanly last net rating, plus 1.7. 10th on offense, 11th on defense. We've talked about Tyler Hero previously and everything else. But this was a fascinating game.
Yeah, and Miami controlled it throughout in the first three quarters. They took 36 free throw attempts in the first three quarters. And I think 4 during the competitive portion of the fourth, which was a big part of it. The Magic were without just about everybody, and then would become without even more guys with the demise of Mo Wagner, who suffered a torn ACL, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But the Magic were, of course, without Paolo and Franz. Jalen Suggs was a game-time decision, ended up not participating due to an ankle sprain. He's questionable for Monday. Wendell Carter Jr. got himself ejected, arguing a goaltending call in the second quarter. So 4 starters were out for the Magic. Then Jimmy Butler left due to a stomach issue a few minutes in, but the Heat were up. And this is one of those games, a lot of times you'll see the comeback more of a yo-yo thing where you see the team that's up reach their largest lead and then immediately the team will come back. This wasn't one of those games. Miami was up 20 for basically the middle 2 quarters of this game. Like there wasn't any kind of a push from Orlando. They kind of had a short one right at the end of the third, and then it got bumped back up to 22, and you're like, okay, that's about it. And then they go 12-0 out of the chute in the first 3 minutes of the fourth quarter with Jet Howard hit a couple of movement threes. He was being pretty aggressive coming off of screens. Trevelin Queen. You remember Trevelin Queen, Danny?
Oh, yeah. Two-way guy. Sixers and a few other places.
Yeah, Rockets, Sixers, and then I can't remember when he ended up with the Magic, but he hit a couple of threes, played some pretty good defense on Tyler Hero. They tasked him to that a lot of the fourth quarter. He got over screens pretty well. And then Cole Anthony went completely crazy. He actually started off the comeback with this ridiculous yoke back one-handed tip dunk along the baseline where the Magic just got more numbers on the offensive glass. That's another great tactic for trying to come back down 20 is just send everyone to the offensive glass, increase the variance. And hey, if they get a run out on you, at least it didn't take very much time.
Sure. Well, and on Cole Anthony, for those who wondered how many injuries it takes for Cole Anthony to like really get time, the answer is basically all of them. But so KCP and Anthony Black.
Well, he didn't even start in this one either, right?
No, KCP and Anthony Black started at the guard spots, and then Cole Anthony scored enough. He had 35 points in 28 minutes of action, 13 of 25 from the field. So good to see him really get that opportunity.
Yeah, and they needed every bit of creation that they could find with their eventually top 4 offensive players unavailable. But he was able to be pretty efficient and took him home. He had a big drive against Tyler Hero, knocked him back with the off arm, and then went to a step back along the left baseline. So they're able to get him a decent enough matchup, and then he did a good enough job of distributing to set up a few corner threes for them. They started off with Jonathan Isaac playing center in this stretch. No Mo Wagner, obviously, and then they went back to Batadze to close it out. He, again, it was outstanding in this one. So it was really just great defense. The Heat scored 3 points in 9 minutes in the quarter. It ended up being a 37-8 quarter, and 2 of those points were after it was already decided for Miami. And, I mean, they just couldn't score. And a few of those were Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero missing threes at the top of the key that, you know, I wouldn't say that like they should make. It's not a 50% shot, but there were okay shots. I thought the 2 guys who really struggled to me, number one was Jaime Jaquez. He starts the quarter. Bam actually played this whole quarter too. He was like negative 32 or something in this game. But Jaime Jaquez was involved in 3 turnovers right at the beginning. First, he couldn't get post position. They tried to throw it to him in the post, and it just goes out of bounds. And then he had a couple of other post ups against like pretty decent matchups, like smaller guards who you would think he was stronger than, that he just got in the lane and then just fumbled it and lost it. Like, he is having a really, really difficult year. It was noteworthy too that that Rockets game, Cam Whitmore had his best game of the season. He's largely been playing in the G League, and then Brandon Pajemski has been another of the most disappointing players. So maybe the Lakers, Jalen Hood-Schifino was the right pick.
No,
let's not go that far. But but it is noteworthy that, and I think I'm still very high on the future of Whitmore in particular among those 3. But it is noteworthy that all those guys are really struggling this year after we thought they were like this awesome run of guys. Haywood Highsmith, for some reason, only played 6 minutes. I didn't see anything about an injury from him. Maybe they just felt like they couldn't score. But, you know, maybe putting him in and throwing him on a hot Cole Anthony might have been pretty good. They still do. I actually thought this would have been a good time to try to go back to Bam Adebayo doing some switching. Because
there's no one who can attack one-on-one.
Yeah. Like, if you just, fine, he switches out onto Cole Anthony, but Bam is just, he's doing actually one of the lowest amounts of switching of bigs now. He used to be so amazing at that, and now they're just keeping him more towards the rim. Also, his defensive field goal percentage at the rim numbers are really bad this year as well. And again, that's just with the Heat kind of taking this shift towards playing more small guards, and like, their overall defense hasn't been awful. But he hasn't been close to a top 5 defender in basketball, which I think he has been these last couple of years. And then the offense has been totally atrocious. I mentioned him as another one of these guys that just, he was not able to really create a shot. Like, they threw him the ball against Batadze. Like, they threw him it more often against Isaac. And while Isaac is really good, you also would think maybe Bam could kind of bludgeon his way into position against Isaac. That just didn't work at all. And Bam, we talked about his shooting struggles quite a bit so far this season. All right, here's another one for you. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was 12 of 12 from the foul line. His 12 attempts or 12 makes a career high. I'm going to say no.
I think the makes are. That's going to be my guess.
It was a very foul-happy game. Except in the fourth, when that was part of Miami's problem, is they missed a bunch of shots around the rim when like guys were just getting killed. And the Magic were kind of too. But it seemed like the refereeing shifted in the fourth quarter, and like nobody could get a call on a layup.
It is a career high for both makes and attempts.
Wow.
He had only had 10 as a career high on a couple other occasions.
Yeah, he hit another huge shot too, where they had him go to his right out of the corner. He went all the way to the baseline and pulled up for a long 2, which, hey, that for this team, that's actually probably pretty good offense. Just not Nikola Jokic handing off to him anymore. And I also, there's one other thing that I've seen this a few times now, came up in some of the games that we've done live too, where peel switching is all the rage at the moment. And I think generally it's a very, very good tactic, particularly if there's a drive from the wing. It's very easy to just have someone come off the strong side corner, take the driver, and then whoever was on him could peel switch back to the corner. And you should be able to do that and not give up too much. But you're also seeing, and I really hate it out of pick and roll, you're seeing a lot of times bigs will get beaten at the point of attack in pick and roll. The guy's going in for a layup. There is some help there. And like Bam Adebayo had this one play where that happened, and he just like ran to the corner to try to take the pass to the corner. And all right, I get that you want to try to take everything away, and he's a really intense guy, but he just left the offensive glass completely open for Goga Batadze. So I don't think it's smart in a play where the ball handler is getting downhill and pick and roll for the big to run to the corner, because now you're just leaving the offensive glass completely exposed. And if they want to throw it to the corner, like, you're much better off with them taking a corner three or someone else trying to rotate out there than just leaving the offensive glass completely open, even if they do happen to miss the layup.
Well,
But
and Nate,
that
I
was
think
a little odd to me.
I think that's especially true for the Heat, who have very little supplemental rim protection and who have very little supplemental rebounding. They're largely playing pretty small at the 4 and often playing pretty small at the 3, particularly in a game like this where Jimmy Butler didn't participate. So you're giving up a lot to take away that corner 3, which particularly gets the Magic. And I know you're not trying to tailor your strategy to a specific opponent in time. The Magic shooting is not fantastic.
Are we done?
We should talk a little bit about Mo Wagner, unfortunately.
Yes. Yeah. But we've done all the teams, correct?
Yes, we have done all the teams.
Wow. Okay. That was a pretty efficient show there, actually. That was like 2 hours. But yeah, Mo Wagner done for the season with an ACL. You talk about the implications in a second, but it was another one of these plays. If you're a Kawhi fan or a Clippers fan, you've seen it a bunch of times where a guy is running alongside someone who's guarding him, and it's kind of that straight line pathway play that's been all the rage, where guys are kind of leaning against each other. You want to try to get your shoulder past him, turn the corner, or just lean into him, knock him back. And if you don't succeed in knocking him back, or the other guy's leaning on you and can kind of overpower you a little bit as you're driving, then imagine you're trying to like push with your leg into the guy. But if that fails and he overpowers you, now there's all this more weight on your outside leg trying to push into him than you would expect, and you can suffer a knee injury very quickly there if your quad just isn't strong enough. And so that's what happened to Mo Wagner. He was going left, and his left leg just buckled when he kind of got knocked a little bit, and there was just more weight on that leg than he was expecting when it landed, and he just crumpled to the ground. It was terrible. Franz was not happy seeing it, obviously, but like, they're really going to miss him. Like, this is a team that struggles desperately on offense. Who's going to replace him?
It's hard to know. I mean, they especially given the absences they already have, but Wagner being a dynamic offensive player of their bigs was really useful for the Magic. I thought that even if it wasn't quite the same as last year, the Wagner, Jonathan Isaac minutes were so great last year, and he, gives them a place to have some possessions go. It has great interplay with his brother, of course. So it is going to be hard for them to navigate the Magic. Not that the financial is the important part of this. They're well clear of the tax for this year, but remember that Wagner, they structured a lot of these things in terms of team options for next year. We don't know what his recovery is going to look like. Of course, we hope it's a full and quick recovery for Wagner.
Yeah, but he won't be ready to start next season.
No, I would presume not. And so what I think might happen is just to throw a little pin out there, is that I wouldn't be surprised if the Magic decline that team option, take Wagner at a much more team-friendly number, but then they would have full bird rights. And so you could potentially navigate the luxury tax for next year, which isn't their bigger concern. Their bigger concern is 26, 27. But keep him around, have him be a part of the team, can have him recover on his own time, and then you bring him back into the rotation when he's ready.
Mo Wagner was 65% true shooting on 27 usage.
Incredible.
This year. Like, that is one of the higher numbers you're going to see from a big, and he doesn't do it isolating. He'll catch the ball in short areas and drive to the basket quickly, and he's a physical finisher. That's what he was trying to do when he hurt himself. He's really their only, I would say, good pick and roll big. Like, Batadze is like kind of okay. His hands aren't great. Mo's hands are awesome. He's also a quality player on the offensive glass. But that's the biggest thing, the amount of shots that he's able to generate as an inside player. Like, he really cuts extremely well off the ball, just understands angles on little seals, and can get to the foul line. Solid defensive rebounder. He certainly is a liability trying to protect the rim, where about all he can do is take charges. But if you pair him with Isaac, that worked pretty well. So I'm like, they were going to be really reliant on him when Franz and Paolo were out, and he's a really good pick and roll partner for some of their limited guards. And as you said, great with his brother. So this is definitely a loss for the Magic. And yeah, like you, I predict that they'll come to some sort of an arrangement for next year for him to come back, noting that he's not going to play probably until around this time next year. And I want to remind everyone listening on the free feed to please give us a subscription to our free mailing list, which consists of Dan Feldman's Daily Dunks twice per week, where he'll catch you up on all the latest news around the league and little things such as teams missing 75 combined three-pointers for an NBA record in a game, and all of the salary cap minutia. I'm sure we'll break down the Alex Caruso extension in the coming days, you would think. So, because I exercise almost zero editorial control over him whatsoever. So he just writes what he wants. But he has great instincts for that. And if I tried to exercise that control, it would probably just make it worse. So I figure less work for a better product is a win-win. But hope you all will consider subscribing to that. Link to that is in the show notes. And we will talk to y'all on Christmas Day after the Christmas games. Till then.